tiny mini intro. So Henry used to work at Google for how many years? A few years.
Too long.
A few years at Google.
Too long.
And now he started his own company, Context.ai. It's on the slide there. They're building better LLM products for user analytics, and he's going to tell you all about how he does user analytics better than anyone else with LLMs. To you.
I am. Thank you. Yeah, good to see everyone. I'm Henry. Going to talk a bit about how we enable people to build better LLM products using user analytics. And I think actually the biggest problem at the moment in the LLM ecosystem is the product layer. And I think that's the most interesting layer for people to focus on. And why do I think that? It's because we're in a period of such rapid change when so many new user behavior patterns are emerging. There's chatbots and agents and so many new things that are developing. And actually no one really knows what's going to work yet, right? It's still so early that people are experimenting with lots of different things, but no one actually really knows. And who is responsible for building a product that is ultimately going to drive value for a user? It's the product person on the team, whether that's a product manager, whether it's an engineer, whoever actually has that title, is the person who's making the product decisions and deciding how should we evolve the product and iterate towards product market fit. And product market fit is obviously a journey, and the process of getting there is informed by user understanding and kind of user data. So what we see a lot of people doing in the ecosystem today is launching LLM products and just shipping them out there totally blind. So you have all these people building chatbots, building agentic systems, and you actually go and ask them, and I had this conversation even a couple of times with people in the room today, how do you know how people are using your product? And they don't. People just don't know how these products are actually being used, which is kind of staggering. And as a product manager, that makes it really hard to build user empathy, makes it really hard to know how you can improve your product. And so what we see is an opportunity to try and help solve this problem and to try and solve this kind of black box problem or this kind of blindfold that a lot of people have. So the solution that a lot of people are using today to try and solve this is just reading all the logs, reading all the chat transcripts, but that doesn't really scale beyond a few dozen users. So a better solution is user analytics or product analytics, which is what we build and I'm going to show today. So enough slides, into the demo. So how this works is basically you send us, if you imagine you're building a conversational product using a large language model. You send us all the transcripts from that large language model, or you can self-host the product. We have an API endpoint that accepts these transcripts. And then we basically do two things with those transcripts. The first is we categorize them into groups. And these groups are not mutually exclusive, but this is really how you try to understand how are people using the product. You're taking 100,000 chat transcripts that happened over the last week, and you're saying, well, this 1,000 are about something, these 5,000 are about something else, these 10,000 are about something else. And that's how you understand what are the most popular use cases that drive people to actually engage with your product. Second thing we do is then score each interaction and say, okay, well, this transcript, how successful or unsuccessful was that? And there's a lot of different signals you can use for that. And then where that gets interesting is when you can combine those two groups and you say, okay, well, this category on all these performance signals looks pretty good, but then this other category actually looks pretty poor. So how that actually works in practice is here you see you've got a list of chat transcripts. You can click into any one of these. Each one of these represents obviously a conversation. So you can see you've got a system prompt, user query, and then any number of assistant messages after that. So if we scroll through this, we can see some of these conversations have been categorized. So this is obviously just a demo that relates to a customer support chatbot. And here you can see this user is asking questions about store visits. And so we've categorized this conversation to be about store visits. And you can see the reasoning. This user expresses excitement about visiting a store. And here you can see, yeah, that is indeed the case. And this is represented by this category here. Then the second thing that we do is this scoring the success or failure of the interaction. So here you can see we're running a sentiment model, just an open source one, over all these transcripts. You can see here very high sentiment. So that's obviously a good sign. But here you can see the user sentiment is trending down. So even if the average of that conversation was really positive and the sentiment was really positive, if it started very positive and ended up only mildly positive, it's got worse. And that's actually a sign that the user wasn't happy with the performance of the product. Other signals that we can look at are conversion rates, as well as free text feedback that can be added by the user after the interactions occurred. So that's kind of the base layer. Transcripts come in, get categorized, get scored for their success. What we then do is ladder this up into these categories. So this is done by looking at a taxonomy of categories that you as the user can create. So if we do create a new topic here, then we actually just run an LLM over all of the conversations that have occurred, over all the messages that have come in. And then you can use that to do like semantic matching, where you want to look at semantic equivalent to a category. You can do user intent extraction, which LLMs are really good at, or you can just do like a naive keyword match as well. So once you've configured that taxonomy, you can see here like a list of all the categories, and then you can see a lot of people are asking about returns policies, not so many people are asking about opening hours. And if you scroll further down here, you can actually see these additional categories that we've suggested. So this is not using the taxonomy of tags. This is instead using a clustering model where we take all those transcripts, all those messages, cluster them into groups so that you don't have to set up that taxonomy if you don't want to, and you also might discover something new, right? Because you can't predict everything your users are going to do. So then what do you actually do with this information? Like, how does this become helpful? Well, hopefully, it's where you see first, how people are using your product, and then you see performance problems. So here you can see, when people are talking about Adidas, they seem like they're pretty positive. But actually it looks like we've got a bit of a problem here because lots of people are talking about returns policies, and when they do talk about returns policies, they're pretty negative, right? So if we click into that, we can see a whole page of data that just relates to returns policies. So we can see, how many conversations are there that have been categorized with this tag. You can see what's the sentiment of those conversations, what's the rating of those conversations over time. You can see the length of those conversations and how they're trending. And then given this is a performance problem, you probably want to debug what's driven the performance. So then you can click in, you can see all these messages that relate specifically to returns policies, and then you can kind of debug what's driving this issue. And then here you can start to apply manual ratings as well. So you can apply a tag, label this with something for another member of the team to look at. And here actually this is an example where you've got a tool message as well, where you can basically log any custom events. So I think that's the high level of it. We also do like per user analytics if you want to look at like retention and cohort analysis and those kinds of things. And then perhaps the final slide or the final thing to demonstrate is just workspace. This is where you can build like custom graphs and charts. This is where it gets more powerful, where you can say like I want to see how many messages there were over the last 30 days, but then I want to group this by like a specific model. I want to see which models drove the most engagement or which models drove the best user ratings. And this is where people run A/B tests commonly and then want to see, with this model, is it better than that model, or this prompt, is it better than that prompt, or this version of an agent, is it better than this other version? So anyway, that's the overview. Happy to take any questions, or I can sit down and shut up. Yep.
Really cool that you let users specify their own topics. Do you ever find that they put in things that the models aren't very good at finding, or either they find nothing or they find incorrect things, and how do you track that?
Yes, so the false positive rate of the categories has been probably the biggest challenge that we face. We've rebuilt the system so many times. So we were initially using like semantic matching and semantic classifier models, which performed like okay, but not brilliantly. More recently, we've shifted to use LLMs to do the matching, and very recently we shifted to GPT-4o Mini, and performs actually fantastically, much better than using a classifier, and also now the price is coming down so rapidly that it works pretty well. We've not found like consistent performance, we've not found specific areas where it performs better or worse. What we have found is that, with the classifier-based model, false positives were a challenge. And so how we've addressed that is that you actually can mark, we're just about to launch, that you can mark one of these tags as a false positive. But then if you go into the topics, you can add few-shot examples. So here you can see I can do an LLM topic, and I can do that to match like user intent. And then you can add these few-shot examples to try and improve the accuracy further, because it's very visible when you have a false positive category and people really don't like it. Any other questions? Yep.
Hi. Firstly, this is really cool and useful, so thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any areas when you're evaluating the quality of the outputs that you feel needs human annotation? The way I'm coming from that question is, so we're building something in a legal context, and I can understand whether something's a good answer or a bad answer, because I've been advising on law for 10 years, but an LLM is probably going to struggle because they don't understand the kind of legal context. I know you do some work for lawyers as well. How would you approach that kind of problem? Do you need human annotation, or are there other ways of doing it?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And actually, I think that's a challenge that a lot of like LLM eval companies run into, is that they're typically using LLMs as judges in these kinds of ways to determine success. We think that actually humans are the best way to judge the performance of the LLM. And so everything that we have here is actually more focused around look at the performance of your product through the lens of your users and see, are your users satisfied or dissatisfied? So I think looking at how satisfied or dissatisfied your end users are is the way to judge the performance. In terms of how you do that in our tool, then yes, absolutely. So this is where these labels and ratings come in. So you would often, like we work with some legal companies, and so then what they would do is get like a lawyer or like a paralegal to go through and actually review often the subset of these that have been flagged as negative by their users. And then they go and review that subset and see, some of them may be fine and they apply like 5 stars, but then let's say another one is actually really problematic, and then you might want to label this like to investigate, and then you can pass that to someone else to try and debug exactly what's gone wrong, because the human eye is definitely the best way still to judge, especially in those kind of like expert domains. Yep.
So as a user, as a product manager, if I'd like to find out what are the worst responses happening in my product, and it's kind of at scale,
Yep.
based on a range of metrics, most of which you probably mentioned, there might be other metrics that you haven't mentioned.
Mhm.
What's the best way I can use this product to kind of see the worst thing and maybe like a descending priority list of like things worth fixing? How might I do that user journey with this product?
Yeah, great question. So typically how that works is really at the topic level. So here, because usually the people we're working with have like a large volume of data, so they don't want to see a raw list of all of the conversations. So we do that at the topic level. So here you would say, okay, I want to show like the topic that's got the worst sentiment or the best sentiment, and often users will actually have like very large numbers of these categories. And so typically, you would sort this and then click into the most negative one within the conversation list. So here, you actually can't sort this list by like intensity of negative sentiment. It's an interesting idea to do. Everything is API accessible, so you can export it and then query it out yourself. But yeah, we don't currently support like sorting this list by like the intensity of the negative signal, but it's a good idea. Yes, so the topics are non-mutually exclusive, so that you can think of them almost as like labels that are being attached to a conversation. So yes, they can be very much overlapping. You could have one that's kind of like a child of another, which is like a subset, or they can just be like a Venn diagram overlapping. And this is kind of the overview of one topic. So you typically go into this page and try and understand what's driving poor performance. I guess actually, I'm just making this up on the fly, this is how you would do it. Like here you've got the average, you've got the sentiment, and this is plotting all the sentiments. And so here you can see this and this are the most negative. And if you click into that, then actually you can see the exact conversation that drove the most negative sentiment. So I guess that's how you do it. I'm surprised that worked. Yeah.
I was just curious, how do you kind of handle, like, I feel like some kind of conversations are kind of inherently negative, like a return is like, it didn't work out, I got to send it back. So how do you kind of like, does that factor into the scoring or? Yeah,
that's a really good question. That's something we struggled with. And so the way we do that is that you can tune the sensitivity of the sentiment, because if like some of our customers are using us for like job phone screens, like if you're a job applicant, you want to put, you want to run a phone screen via an LLM, and people are always going to be pretty professional and respectful in that kind of context. Whereas if you're like a customer support product, especially if you realize you've bumped into a chatbot, some people are pretty unhappy about that. And so you really do want to be able to tune this. And so you'll see this distribution varies pretty wildly.
Cool.
How are we doing for time? One more? Cool. Yep.
How do you think about the increasing amount of founders that don't do conversational products only? I used to like have a product that was conversational only. Now we've compartmentalized it, infused it with UI. Can your product still be relevant there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like we started primarily on the conversational product because we saw that was where there was like a true gap and no one had a solution. So that's where we started. We've since expanded though to look at being kind of like event-driven analytics as well. So you can log these conversion events, we call them. So if you're like a conversational commerce product, you're saying, I want a running shoe for trail running that supports, wide arches or whatever. And then you could get that product recommendation that would come up, and then you might want to make a purchase. And you can log that event to us and then say which categories have the highest conversion rates or which have the lowest conversion rates. So we're kind of slowly moving towards doing some of like the post-hog mixed panel type analytics as well. But the time being, we're focusing still on the conversational as like our bread and butter. Cool.
Oh, thank you so much, Henry.
Thank you. Yes.